Jason Miller was a man who lived a quiet and predictable life. Every day he woke up at 6 in the morning, had a cup of coffee, and drove his old car to the gas station where he worked. The station wasn't anything special. It was just a small building on the edge of town with 2 fuel pumps out front and a convenience store inside. But for Jason, it was enough. It gave him a paycheck even if it wasn't much, and it kept him busy. Maplewood, the town where Jason lived, wasn't big or exciting. Most people knew each other by name, and everyone had their routines. Some went to work at the factory down the road. Others ran errands around town. Life moved slowly there, and Jason liked that. It meant no surprises, no stress. Or so he thought. On this particular evening, Jason was alone at the station. His co-worker, Kevin, had called in sick earlier that day, leaving Jason to handle everything by himself. It wasn't unusual. Jason often covered shifts when someone couldn't make it, but tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was the weather. A cold wind swept through the streets, carrying with it the promise of snow. The sky was dark, dotted, with stars that seemed unusually bright against the blackness. As Jason stood behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine to pass the time, he heard the faint sound of a car engine sputtering outside. He glanced up and saw headlights pulling into the station. A beat-up sedan came to a stop near one of the pumps. Its paint was chipped, and one of the taillights was cracked. The driver's door opened, and a young woman stepped out. She looked tired, her face pale under the dim light of the station sign. Jason watched as she walked toward the pump, dragging her feet slightly. She wore a faded jacket that didn't seem warm enough for the freezing temperature. Behind her, 2 kids climbed out of the back seat, 1 boy and 1 girl, both bundled in coats that were too big for them. They stayed close to their mother, looking up at her with wide eyes. When the woman reached the pump, she hesitated. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her wallet and flipped it open. Jason could see from the window that she didn't have much. Inside, a few crumpled bills and some loose change. After a moment, she glanced toward the station, then approached the door. The bell above the entrance jingled as she stepped inside. Up close, Jason noticed how worn she looked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She gave him a weak smile and said, "Hi, I need to fill up my tank, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the floor. Jason waited patiently, sensing that she wasn't finished speaking. When she finally continued, her words came out in a rush. "I don't have enough money right now. I've been trying to save, but things are tough. My husband left us last year, and I lost my job recently. I'm doing my best, but it's hard." She paused, swallowing hard. "I just need $15 worth of gas to get home. Please." Jason studied her for a moment. He'd seen plenty of customers come and go during his time at the station, but something about this woman struck him. Maybe it was the way she held herself, straight-backed despite her exhaustion, or the way her kids clung to her legs, silent but watchful. Whatever it was, Jason felt a pang of sympathy. "Don't worry about it," he said finally, surprising even himself. "Just take what you need." The woman blinked, startled. "What?" "You heard me," Jason replied with a shrug. "Go ahead and fill up your tank, no charge." Her eyes filled with tears, and she stammered, "Are you sure? I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I promise." Jason shook his head. "It's okay, really. Just focus on getting your family where they need to be." For a moment, the woman simply stared at him, as if unsure whether to believe him. Then she nodded, murmuring a soft, "Thank you," before hurrying back to her car. Jason watched as she pumped the gas, her movements quicker now, less hesitant. Once the tank was full, she returned to the station and thanked him again, her voice thick with emotion. With that, she gathered her children and drove away, disappearing into the night. Jason sighed and leaned against the counter. He knew he'd probably hear about this later. Mr. Peterson, the station manager, was strict about company policies, and giving away free gas definitely counted as breaking the rules. Still, Jason couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Helping someone in need felt right. An hour passed without incident. Jason tidied up the shelves, restocked the snacks, and cleaned the windows. Just as he was about to lock up for the night, the phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, calling to remind him to send over the security footage from the day's shift. Jason froze. He'd forgotten all about the cameras. The next morning, Jason arrived at the station early, dreading what was coming. Sure enough, Mr. Peterson was waiting for him, his expression grim. Without saying a word, he played the recording of the previous night's events on the small monitor in his office. Jason watched silently as the footage showed him letting the woman leave without paying. When the clip ended, Mr. Peterson turned to Jason, his face red with anger. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" he demanded. "You violated company policy. Do you know what that means?" Jason nodded. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Well, apparently you don't," Mr. Peterson snapped. "Because if you did, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. You're fired, effective immediately." The words hit Jason like a punch, under the gut. Fired. Over $15. He tried to protest, explaining why he'd made the choice he did. But Mr. Peterson wouldn't listen. In the end, Jason gathered his belongings and left the station, feeling numb. As he walked to his car, the cold air biting at his skin, Jason wondered if he'd made a mistake. Had he been too reckless? Too trusting? He replayed the scene in his mind, remembering the gratitude in the woman's eyes and the relief in her voice. No matter what happened next, he told himself, he wouldn't change what he'd done, even if it cost him his job. Little did Jason know, his act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Jason sat on a cold metal bench outside the gas station, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. The wind was sharp and biting, cutting through the thin fabric like it wasn't even there. He stared at the ground, his mind racing, with thoughts about what he'd just lost. His job, his routine, his paycheck, all gone because of one decision to help someone in need. He sighed heavily and glanced up at the darkening sky. It had been less than an hour since Mr. Peterson had fired him, and Jason still couldn't shake the feeling of unfairness. $15. That was all it took to ruin his day, or maybe his life. He tried to remind himself that he'd done the right thing by letting Lisa skip the payment, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Now he had bills to pay and no way to cover them. Just as Jason started thinking about heading home, the sound of an engine broke through his thoughts. At first, he didn't pay much attention. Cars passed by the station all the time, and most people didn't stop unless they needed gas or snacks. But this car was different. The engine purred smoothly, almost silently, and when Jason looked up, he saw a sleek black Rolls-Royce gliding to a halt near the curb. The car was unlike anything Jason had ever seen up close. Its shiny surface reflected the dim light from the gas station sign, making it look almost otherworldly. For a moment, Jason wondered if the driver had made a wrong turn. Who in Maplewood could afford a car like that? The door opened slowly, and out stepped a man who looked like he belonged in a magazine. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, and his shoes gleamed as though they'd been polished just moments ago. Everything about him screamed wealth and success. The man glanced around for a second before spotting Jason on the bench. He walked over with long, confident strides, his expression calm but curious. When he reached Jason, he stopped and said, "Are you the one who got fired today?" Jason blinked, caught off guard by the question. Yeah," he replied hesitantly. "That's me." The man nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then he extended his hand. "My name is Richard Hayes. I own the gas station where you used to work." Jason's eyes widened in surprise. Of all the people who might have shown up, he hadn't expected the owner of the station to come looking for him. Shaking Richard's hand, he muttered, "Oh, I didn't think anyone important would care about what happened." Richard chuckled softly. "Important? Let's not get carried away. But yes, I do care. Word gets around quickly when something unusual happens, especially in a place like Maplewood. A friend of mine works at the station and told me about your act of kindness. and how it ended for you." Jason frowned, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or defensive. "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal," he said quietly. "I just wanted to help someone who needed it." "I know," Richard replied, his tone thoughtful. "And that's exactly why I'm here. Not many people would have done what you did. Most would have followed the rules no matter what. But you chose compassion instead. That says a lot about your character." Jason shifted uncomfortably on the bench. He wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone like Richard. "Thanks," he mumbled. "But I'm guessing you didn't drive all the way out here just to tell me that." Richard smiled faintly. "You're right. I came because I wanted to meet you in person, and to offer you a chance." "A chance?" Jason echoed, his brow furrowing. "What kind of chance?" Richard gestured toward the Rolls-Royce. "Why don't we talk somewhere more comfortable? There's a cafe down the street. I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we can discuss it properly." Jason hesitated. This whole situation felt surreal. Only an hour ago he'd been sitting here wondering how he'd survive without a job, and now a wealthy businessman was offering to take him out for coffee. Was this some sort of trick? Or maybe Richard had ulterior motives. Still, Jason couldn't think of a reason to say no. Standing up, he shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" The two men climbed into the Rolls-Royce, and Jason couldn't help but marvel at the luxury inside. The seats were soft leather, and the dashboard gleamed with polished wood and chrome accents. Even the air smelled expensive, like fresh cologne mixed with something crisp and clean. As Richard drove them to the cafe, Jason found himself glancing around, half expecting to wake up from a dream. When they arrived, Richard parked the car and led Jason inside. The cafe was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. They ordered their drinks and found a quiet corner table to sit at. Once they were settled, Richard leaned back in his chair and studied Jason carefully. "So," Richard began, "tell me about yourself. What brought you to Maplewood? What are your dreams? And why did you decide to let that woman go without paying?" Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure where to start. He wasn't used to talking about himself, especially not to strangers. But something about Richard's demeanor put him at ease. The man didn't seem judgmental or impatient. Instead, he appeared genuinely interested in hearing Jason's story. Taking a deep breath, Jason began to speak. He talked about growing up in a small town similar to Maplewood, about moving here after high school because he didn't have anywhere else to go. He admitted that he'd never really had grand ambitions. He just wanted to live a simple, honest life. And then he explained why he'd let Lisa skip the payment. "It's hard to explain," Jason said, his voice quieter now. "I guess I saw her kids, you know. They were standing there looking scared and tired, and she looked so desperate, like she was barely holding it together. I couldn't imagine sending her away empty-handed. I figured $15 wasn't going to break the company, but it meant everything to her." Richard listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Jason finished, there was a brief silence before Richard spoke again. "You know," he said, "most people wouldn't have taken that risk. They'd be too worried about getting in trouble or losing their jobs. But you trusted your instincts. You acted with empathy even though you knew it might cost you." Jason shrugged, feeling awkward under Richard's praise. "I don't think I did anything special. Anyone else would have done the same." "No," Richard said firmly. "They wouldn't. Trust me. I've seen enough to know that true kindness is rare these days. And that's why I'm offering you this opportunity." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What kind of opportunity?" Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "I own several businesses in this area, including a chain of convenience stores aimed at helping low-income families. We sell affordable goods and try to give back to the community whenever we can. Right now, I'm looking for someone trustworthy to manage one of my newer locations, someone who understands the struggles people face and knows how to connect with them." Jason stared at him, stunned. "Wait, you want me to manage a store?" "Yes," Richard replied simply. "Why not? You've already proven that you have the qualities I'm looking for. Compassion, integrity, and a willingness to put others first. Those are traits that can't be taught. But, Jason stammered, shaking his head, I don't have any experience running a business. I've only ever worked at gas stations and places like that. I wouldn't even know where to start. That's okay, Richard assured him. I'll provide training and support. You won't be thrown into the deep end. Besides, managing a store isn't just about numbers or strategies. It's about understanding people. And based on what I've seen so far, you're a natural at that. Jason felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, but doubt quickly followed. Could he really pull this off? Could he step into a role that seemed so far beyond his current reality? He didn't want to disappoint Richard or himself. I'll think about it, Jason said finally, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But I need some time to process everything. Of course, Richard said, smiling warmly. Take all the time you need. Just remember, sometimes the best opportunities come when you least expect them. As they finished their coffee and left the cafe, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Jason spent the rest of the evening thinking about Richard's offer. He drove home in silence, his mind racing with questions and doubts. Could he really manage a store? Was he capable of doing something so different from what he'd always done? The idea felt both exciting and terrifying at the same time. When he got home, Jason sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the wall. His small apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It wasn't much a one-bedroom place with old furniture and peeling paint, but it was his, or at least it had been until today. Without a job, he wasn't sure how long he'd be able to keep it. He thought back to the conversation with Richard. The man had seemed sincere, almost too good to be true. Jason couldn't help but wonder if there was some catch he hadn't noticed. Maybe Richard expected something in return, something Jason wasn't ready to give. Still, the idea of helping people through a business like the one Richard described appealed to him. It sounded meaningful, like something that could make a difference in the community. The next morning, Jason decided to visit one of Richard's stores. Richard had mentioned that seeing the operation firsthand might help Jason understand what was involved. So after grabbing a quick breakfast, Jason drove across town to the address Richard had given him. The store was located in a modest neighborhood, tucked between a laundromat and a small bakery. From the outside, it didn't look particularly impressive. A plain brick building with large windows and a sign that read, Hayes Community Market. But when Jason stepped inside, he was surprised by how welcoming it felt. The interior was clean and brightly lit, with shelves stocked neatly with affordable groceries, household items, and fresh produce. There were posters on the walls advertising discounts and community events, and a bulletin board near the entrance displayed flyers for local charities and job openings. A few customers milled around, chatting with each other or browsing the aisles. Behind the counter stood a woman in her mid-30s with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile. She introduced herself as Karen, the current manager of the store. When Jason explained who he was and why he'd come, Karen nodded knowingly. Richard told me you might stop by, she said, gesturing for Jason to follow her. Come on, I'll show you around. As they walked through the store, Karen pointed out various features and explained how everything worked. She showed him the inventory system, the pricing strategy, and the process for ordering supplies. She also talked about the store's mission, to provide essential goods at low prices while supporting the community in other ways. We host workshops here sometimes, Karen said, leading Jason to a small corner of the store where folding chairs were set up. Things like resume writing, budgeting, and even cooking classes. People love it because it gives them tools to improve their lives. Jason listened intently, impressed by how much thought had gone into every aspect of the business. It wasn't just a store. It was a resource center, a place where people could find not only what they needed but also encouragement and support. Karen then shared stories of how the store had impacted the community. She told Jason about a single father who'd come in looking for baby formula he couldn't afford elsewhere. The staff had arranged a payment plan for him, allowing him to take what he needed without stress. Another time, a young woman had used the workshop space to practice for a job interview. eventually landing a position at a nearby office. "These little things add up," Karen said, her voice filled with pride. "They remind people that someone cares, that they're not alone. That's what makes this place special." By the time the tour ended, Jason felt a spark of excitement growing inside him. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make a real difference. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond surviving day to day. Later that afternoon, Jason called Richard to thank him for arranging the visit. "I think I see what you're talking about now," Jason said. "This isn't just about running a store, it's about helping people." "I'm glad you see that," Richard replied, sounding pleased. "So, does that mean you're interested in taking on the role?" Jason hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. On one hand, the idea of managing a store still intimidated him. He didn't have experience and the responsibility felt overwhelming. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the sense of fulfillment he'd felt during the tour. If he turned down the opportunity, he might regret it for the rest of his life. "Yes," Jason said finally, his voice steady, despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "I'll do it." Richard chuckled softly. "Good. I knew you'd make the right choice. We'll start training you next week, don't worry. You won't be alone. I'll make sure you have all the support you need." Over the next few days, Jason threw himself into preparing for his new role. Richard sent over manuals and guides to help him learn the basics of store management, and Karen offered to mentor him during the transition. Jason spent hours reading, taking notes, and asking questions, determined to prove that Richard's faith in him wasn't misplaced. At the same time, Jason began to notice changes in his outlook. For so long, he'd seen himself as just another cog in the machine, someone who existed to punch a clock and pay the bills. Now, he started to believe that he could be more than that. He could be a leader, someone who inspired others and made their lives better. One evening, as Jason reviewed the training materials at his kitchen table, he found himself smiling. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future. Sure, there would be challenges ahead, he knew that. But he also knew that he wasn't facing them alone. With Richard's guidance and Karen's support, he felt ready to take on whatever came his way. And deep down, Jason couldn't wait to get started. Jason's first day of training at the new store felt like stepping into uncharted territory. The morning sun filtered through the windows as he arrived, casting long shadows across the floor. He carried a notebook and pen with him, ready to jot down anything important. Karen greeted him warmly at the door, her usual cheerful demeanor putting him at ease. "Don't worry too much today," she said, handing him a clipboard. "We'll start slow. Just follow me and I'll walk you through everything." Jason nodded, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. He reminded himself that everyone starts somewhere, and this was his chance to learn. As they began their rounds, Karen explained the daily routines, checking inventory levels, organizing deliveries, and ensuring the shelves stayed stocked. She showed him how to use the cash register system, which was more advanced than the one at the gas station but still manageable once he got the hang of it. Throughout the morning, Jason shadowed Karen as she interacted with customers. Watching her handle each situation with patience and kindness gave him a clearer picture of what being a manager truly meant. It wasn't just about keeping the store running smoothly. It was also about creating an environment where people felt valued and respected. One customer, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, came in looking for canned goods. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane, and seemed unsure of where to find what she needed. Without hesitation, Karen approached her and offered assistance. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," Karen said brightly. "Looking for your usual items?" The woman smiled gratefully. "Yes, dear. You know me so well." Karen helped her gather the items and even carried them to the checkout counter. When Mrs. Harper mentioned that she'd been having trouble finding affordable options elsewhere, Karen assured her that the store would always try to accommodate her needs. Watching this exchange, Jason realized how much trust existed between the staff and the customers. It wasn't just a transactional relationship, it was personal. As the afternoon wore on, Karen handed over some smaller tasks to Jason, letting him practice what he'd learned. At first, he second-guessed every decision, worried about making mistakes. But Karen encouraged him, saying, "You're doing fine. Mistakes happen, and we fix them together. That's how you grow." By the end of the day, Jason felt exhausted, but accomplished. He hadn't mastered everything yet, but he could already see progress. For the first time in years, he went home feeling proud of himself. Not because someone praised him, but because he knew he was working toward something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Jason continued to learn and adapt. Each day brought new challenges, from dealing with delayed shipments to handling complaints when products were out of stock. But with Karen's guidance and Richard's occasional visits to check on his progress, Jason grew more confident in his abilities. Richard often stopped by unexpectedly, sometimes bringing coffee or snacks for the staff. During these visits, he'd ask Jason questions about how things were going and offer advice when needed. One afternoon, as they sat in the break room sipping coffee, Richard leaned back in his chair and said, "You're doing great, Jason, better than I expected, honestly." Jason looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, I'm still learning though, there's a lot I don't know yet." "That's okay," Richard replied. "No one expects you to have all the answers right away. What matters is your attitude. You care about the work, and that makes all the difference." Jason thought about this later that evening as he reviewed the day's sales report. Richard was right. His lack of experience didn't matter as much as his willingness to put in the effort. Every problem he solved, every customer he helped, brought him closer to understanding the bigger picture. One particularly busy Saturday, Jason faced his first major test. A storm had rolled into Maplewood overnight, knocking out power in parts of town. The store became a hub of activity as people rushed in to buy supplies, flashlights, batteries, bottled water, and non-perishable food. The line at the checkout stretched almost to the back of the store. Jason worked alongside Karen and another employee, Sarah, to keep things moving as quickly as possible. They restocked shelves, answered questions, and reassured anxious customers. Despite the chaos, Jason found himself falling into a rhythm. He remembered Karen's earlier advice: stay calm, focus on one task at a time, and communicate clearly with the team. At one point, a man stormed up to the counter, visibly frustrated. "Why don't you have any lanterns left?" he demanded. "I drove all the way here for nothing." Jason took a deep breath and met the man's gaze. "I'm really sorry about that," he said calmly. "We've been overwhelmed with demand because of the storm. If you'd like, I can add your name to our wait list for when the next shipment arrives. We'll call you as soon as they're in stock." The man hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. "Fine, do that." Afterward, Karen pulled Jason aside and gave him a thumbs up. "That was handled perfectly," she said. "You kept your cool and offered a solution instead of arguing. That's exactly what we need in situations like this." Jason smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Handling difficult customers wasn't easy, but knowing he'd done the right thing made it worthwhile. As the weeks turned into months, Jason settled into his role as manager. He no longer felt like an outsider looking in. He belonged. The staff treated him like part of the family, and the customers recognized him by name. Slowly but surely, he began to make changes that reflected his vision for the store. For example, he noticed that many families struggled to afford fresh produce, even at discounted prices. After discussing it with Richard, Jason proposed setting up a community garden behind the store. Customers could volunteer to help maintain it, and in return, they'd receive free vegetables during harvest season. Richard loved the idea and gave his full support. The project brought the community even closer together. Families who rarely spoke to each other before now bonded over planting seeds and pulling weeds. Kids played in the dirt while parents shared stories and laughter. Seeing the garden flourish under their care filled Jason with a sense of accomplishment he'd never experienced before. One evening, as Jason locked up the store after closing, he paused to look around. The shelves were neatly organized, the floors were spotless, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. It might not have been glamorous, but it was his. His hard work, his dedication, his dream. For the first time in his life, Jason felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he was ready to face whatever came next. After all, he wasn't just building a business, he was building connections, trust, and hope. And that, he realized, was worth more than any paycheck. Months passed, and Jason's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The store became more than just a workplace. It was his home away from home. Every morning, he arrived early to prepare for the day ahead. He greeted employees with a smile, checked inventory lists, and made sure everything was ready before customers started streaming in. By now, he knew most of them by name, and they often stopped to chat or thank him for something the store had done to help. One of the biggest changes Jason noticed was how people treated him. Before, when he worked at the gas station, he'd been invisible to most, just another face behind the counter. But now people respected him. They saw him as someone who cared about their well-being, someone they could rely on. It was a strange but wonderful feeling. The community garden project Jason had started turned out to be a huge success. Neighbors came together every weekend to plant, water, and harvest vegetables. Kids learned where food came from, and families shared meals, made with fresh produce grown right there in Maplewood. The garden became a symbol of what could happen when people worked together, not just for themselves but for each other. Jason also introduced new programs at the store. He set up a bargain bin near the entrance, filled with items that were slightly damaged or close to their expiration dates. These goods were sold at deeply discounted prices, making them accessible to those who couldn't afford full-price products. He also created a donation program, encouraging customers to contribute spare change at the register. The money went toward helping struggling families cover urgent expenses like utility bills or medical costs. These initiatives didn't go unnoticed. Word spread quickly around town, and soon, people from neighboring areas started visiting Hayes Community Market. Some came for the affordable prices. Others came because they'd heard about the kindness and support the store offered. Jason felt proud knowing that his efforts were reaching beyond Maplewood and touching lives elsewhere. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Jason stocked shelves near the front of the store, the bell above the door jingled. He glanced up and froze. Standing in the doorway was Lisa Carter, the woman whose $15 gas payment he'd waived months earlier. She looked different now. Her hair was neatly styled, her clothes clean and pressed. More importantly, she seemed less burdened, as if some weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Hi," she said softly, giving him a shy smile. "Do you remember me?" Jason blinked, surprised but pleased to see her. "Of course I do," he replied, stepping closer. "How have you been? How are the kids?" Lisa nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We're doing much better thanks to you. That night, letting me skip the payment meant so much. It gave me enough gas to get home safely, and it reminded me that there are still good people in the world." She hesitated, then added, "I wanted to stop by and say thank you again, and to tell you that your store has helped us too. The prices here make such a difference, especially when times are tough." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. Hearing Lisa's words reinforced why he'd taken this job in the first place. "That's what we're here for," he said simply. "To help however we can." Lisa stayed a little longer, browsing the aisles and chatting with Karen, who recognized her from Jason's story. When she finally left, she waved goodbye and promised to return soon. Watching her go, Jason felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Helping Lisa that night might have cost him his old job, but it had led him to this moment, a chance to continue making a difference. As the year drew to a close, Richard invited Jason to attend a meeting with other managers from his chain of stores. It was held at a hotel conference room in the nearby city, a far cry from the cozy atmosphere of Hayes Community Market. Jason felt out of place among the polished professionals, but Richard reassured him. "You earned your spot here," Richard said firmly. "Your work speaks for itself." During the meeting, Jason listened as managers presented updates on their store's performance. Some focused solely on numbers, sales figures, profit margins, and growth projections. Others talked about challenges they faced, like staffing shortages or supply chain issues. When it was Jason's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and stood up. "I'm not great with fancy presentations," he admitted, earning a few chuckles from the room. "But I can tell you this. My store isn't just about selling things. It's about building connections. We've started programs to help people save money, grow their own food, and even find jobs. Our goal is to be more than a business. We want to be part of the community." He went on to share stories about the garden, the bargain bin, and the donation program. He spoke passionately about the impact these initiatives had on customers' lives, citing examples like Lisa and Mrs. Harper. By the time he finished, the room was silent and several people were nodding in approval. Afterward, Richard pulled Jason aside. "You knocked it out of the park," he said, clapping him on the back. "Some of these folks could learn a thing or two from you." Jason grinned, feeling a surge of pride. For so long, he'd doubted whether he belonged in this role. Now, standing among seasoned professionals, he realized he had something unique to offer, something rooted in empathy and compassion. By spring, Jason's reputation continued to grow. Local newspapers wrote articles about Hayes Community Market, highlighting its innovative approach to serving low-income families. People from other towns reached out, asking how they could replicate similar models in their own communities. Richard encouraged Jason to expand the concept, offering to fund additional locations under his leadership. At first, Jason hesitated. Managing one store was challenging enough. How could he possibly oversee multiple ones? But Richard reminded him that he wouldn't be alone. "You'll have a team supporting you," Richard said. "And besides, you've already proven you can handle anything thrown your way." With Richard's encouragement, Jason agreed to explore the idea. Over the next few months, he visited potential sites, met with local leaders, and brainstormed ways to adapt the original store's model to fit different neighborhoods. Each step of the process excited him, even though it required long hours and hard work. Back in Maplewood, the original store remained a cornerstone of the community. Customers often dropped by just to chat with Jason or share updates about their lives. One day, Kevin, the coworker who'd called in sick the night Lisa came to the gas station, walked in looking sheepish. "Hey, Jason," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can we talk for a minute?" Jason raised an eyebrow, curious. "Sure, what's up?" Kevin sighed. "I heard about what happened after I quit showing up that night, about how you got fired because of me. I feel awful about it." Jason shook his head. "Don't worry about it, it wasn't your fault." "Well, maybe not directly," Kevin admitted, "but I should have been there. Anyway, I've been struggling to find steady work since then. Would you consider hiring me here? I promise I'll pull my weight." Jason studied Kevin for a moment. He remembered the frustration of being let go unfairly and how it had changed his life for the better. Maybe giving Kevin a second chance could do the same for him. "All right," Jason said finally. "You're hired, but show up on time, okay?" Kevin's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, Jason. You won't regret it." As Jason watched Kevin begin training alongside the rest of the staff, he reflected on how far he'd come. From losing his job at the gas station to becoming a leader who inspired others, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet, through every challenge, he'd stayed true to himself, and that made all the difference. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, but Jason was ready. He no longer feared failure, because he knew that failure could lead to unexpected opportunities. With determination, compassion, and the support of those around him, he believed he could overcome anything. And as he stood in the middle of the bustling store, surrounded by laughter and conversation, Jason realized something profound. His act of kindness that cold winter night hadn't just changed Lisa's life, it had changed his own. Years passed, and Jason's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. What had started as a small act of kindness at a gas station grew into something much bigger, a legacy of compassion and community that touched countless lives. Hayes Community Market became more than just a store. It was a symbol of hope for people who needed it most. Under Jason's leadership, the original store thrived. The shelves were always stocked with affordable goods, and the community garden flourished, producing fresh vegetables year after year. Families gathered there not only to shop but also to connect, share stories, and support one another. The store hosted events like free health screenings, job fairs, and holiday meals for those struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't unusual to see lines stretching out the door during these events, with volunteers pitching in to ensure everyone felt welcome. But Jason didn't stop there. With Richard's backing, he expanded the concept to other towns, opening new locations tailored to the needs of each community. Each store followed the same philosophy: affordability, accessibility, and empathy. Jason traveled frequently to oversee operations, train managers, and listen to feedback from customers and employees. Despite the growing responsibilities, he remained grounded, always remembering why he'd started this journey in the first place. One chilly December morning, Jason stood outside the newest location in a neighboring town. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was about to take place, marking the grand opening of the Fifth Hayes Community Market. Dozens of people had gathered, eager to see what the store had to offer. Local officials gave speeches praising Jason's efforts, calling him a beacon of change and a true leader. As Jason prepared to speak, his heart raced. Public speaking still made him nervous, no matter how many times he did it. But when he looked out at the crowd, families bundled in coats, children clutching balloons, elderly neighbors leaning on canes, he found his courage. These were the people he worked for, the ones who inspired him every day. "Thank you all for being here today," Jason began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "This store is more than just a building. It's a place where people can come together, find what they need, and know they're not alone. We've built this with love and care, and we want it to be a resource for everyone." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I didn't do this alone. None of us ever succeed alone. This is the result of teamwork, trust, and believing in something bigger than ourselves. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Jason felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He hadn't expected such an overwhelming response, but it reminded him of why he kept pushing forward, even on the hardest days. Back in Maplewood, the original store continued to thrive. Kevin, the former co-worker who'd begged for a second chance, proved to be one of Jason's most reliable employees. Over time, Kevin took on more responsibility, eventually becoming assistant manager. He often joked that Jason had saved his life by giving him a job, but deep down, both men knew it was true. Jason had given Kevin more than employment. He'd given him purpose. Other former gas station employees joined the team too, drawn by the reputation of kindness and fairness that surrounded Jason's stores. Some came because they'd heard stories about his generosity. Others simply wanted to be part of something meaningful. Together they formed a tight-knit group, working tirelessly to serve their communities. Lisa Carter remained a regular visitor to the store. Her situation had improved dramatically since that cold night at the gas station. She found steady work as a receptionist at a nearby clinic and often brought her kids to the community garden to help plant seeds or harvest vegetables. On special occasions, she stopped by Jason's office to thank him again, though he insisted she didn't need to. "You helped yourself," Jason would say with a smile. "All I did was give you a little push." Lisa disagreed, of course. To her, Jason's actions had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was light if you knew where to look. As the years went by, Jason's influence extended beyond the stores themselves. Other businesses in Maplewood began adopting similar practices, inspired by his example. Grocery stores offered discounts to low-income families, restaurants donated excess food to shelters, and local banks created programs to assist struggling homeowners. Slowly but surely, the entire town became a model of compassion and collaboration. Richard often praised Jason for sparking this transformation. "You've done more than build a chain of stores," he said during one of their meetings. "You've changed the way people think about helping each other. That's extraordinary." Jason shrugged modestly. "I didn't do anything special. I just tried to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. And that's exactly what makes you special, Richard replied. Never lose sight of that. Despite his success, Jason stayed humble. He still lived in the same modest apartment, drove the same old car, and spent his weekends volunteering at the store or tending to the community garden. Money and fame didn't interest him. Making a difference did. Every time someone thanked him for what the stores had done for them, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth could provide. One evening, as Jason locked up the original store after a long day, he paused to look around. The parking lot was empty now, the lights casting soft glows over the asphalt. Inside, the shelves were tidy, the floors clean, and the air smelled faintly of coffee from the break room. It might not have been glamorous, but it was his dream, his creation, his gift to the world. A memory surfaced then, the image of himself sitting on that cold bench outside the gas station, feeling lost and defeated. Back then, he couldn't have imagined where life would lead him. He certainly hadn't planned for any of this. Yet looking back, he realized that losing his job had been the best thing that could have happened. It forced him to take a risk, to trust his instincts and to believe in the power of kindness. Jason climbed into his car and drove home, reflecting on everything he'd accomplished. He thought about Lisa, Kevin, Karen, Richard, and all the others who had played a role in his journey. They weren't just co-workers or acquaintances, they were family. And together, they'd created something beautiful. When he arrived home, Jason sat on his couch and stared out the window at the quiet street below. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, blanketing the ground in white. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel truly content. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was good. Better than good, actually. It was fulfilling. Jason smiled to himself, thinking about how far he'd come. From a simple act of kindness at a gas station to managing a chain of stores that changed lives, his journey had been incredible. But more importantly, it wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, dreams to chase, and people to help. And as long as he stayed true to himself, staying kind, staying humble, staying hopeful, Jason knew he could handle whatever came next. After all, he'd already proven that even the smallest acts of compassion could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. With that thought, Jason leaned back on his couch and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new chances to make a difference, and he was ready.